And we are live. Welcome, mystery and thriller fans. I'm your on-air host and author, Sara DiVello, and I am so excited to welcome tonight, live from New Mexico, Ramona Emerson, here to give us the inside scoop on her brand new book, Exposure. Ramona, welcome to Mystery and Thriller Mavens. Tell us about this book.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Thanks for having me. Hello, everybody out there. So Exposure is actually the sequel to my first book, which was called Shutter. And it follows the continuing adventures of our protagonist, Rita Todacheene, as she continues to delve into the world of ghosts and the undead, while also trying to keep her sanity and her job as a forensic photographer. So I hope you'll be ready to join us for the second installment.
Yay! Well, I am so excited to chat with you about this book, Ramona, because when they sent me the ARC a couple months ago, I immediately emailed. I was like, I have to interview her. I have to interview her because this book addresses so many important issues, and it's spooky season. So we want to talk about ghosts. We want to talk about murder and mayhem. We always want to talk about murder and mayhem, but we're in spooky season, so we also want to talk about ghosts. So I can't wait to get into every delicious detail with you. But first, I just want to welcome everyone. So we are broadcasting live to 8 different destinations across Facebook and YouTube. So hey, mystery and thriller loving friends, no matter where you're watching from, you're in the right place. This is the right time. It is Mystery Monday. And because Mondays can be murder, we're going to make it a little less painful, get your week off to a killer start. If you've been here before, you know the drill. And if you're new, welcome, friends. We're so happy. Here's the drill. We're so happy to have you. Here's the drill. Every Monday, I give you my handpicked featured authors, and you get to ask them anything. So ask Ramona about her writing process, ask her about this book, ask her about her this protagonist. I know I got a lot of questions, but just get those questions going in the chat. We'll get them right over to her. Renee is joining us from Facebook. She says, hi, Sarah and Ramona from Southeast Florida. Hi, Renee. So good to have you. We have Kim also joining us from Facebook saying, hello, book friends. Hi, Kim. Good to have you. I just love dogs as profile pictures. Oh, my goodness. We have award-winning author Tracy Clark joining us from YouTube. Queen Tracy's in the house. Hi, Tracy. Welcome. She says, I loved Shutter and Exposure. Emerson is a wonderful writer. If you haven't read them, you simply must. Well, that is high praise from award-winning author Tracy Clark, fresh off her latest and greatest win. Tracy, thank you so much. It's my pleasure to host Tracy. What is it, 3 or 4 times or 5 times? I don't know. I'm such a huge Tracy fan. So that she is a Ramona fan is just so cool. Renee says George the dog is watching too. Okay, good. All 4-legged and 2-leggeds are welcome. So I want to start with your creative process, Ramona. She says we have Robin joining us from rainy Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. Hi, Robin. Welcome. We have a national crew here. Okay, so Ramona, tell us about your creative process. Has anything changed from book 1 to book 2? And what does a day in the life of Ramona the writer look like?
A day in the life of Ramona the writer is absolutely insanity. I have way too many things going on every day. I am a mom. I am a professor. I am a filmmaker, and then I'm writing on the side, which is insane. And I'm learning to juggle all of those things a little bit better. But as far as the writing process goes, the change, I think, from Shutter into Exposure really was the amount of time I had to tell the story and to get the story out on the page. I literally took 10 years to get Shutter from the early start of what that story was to getting it actually published was a solid 10-year process. With Exposure, it was more like a 1.5 year process. So I had to learn how to hurry up and write the second story quickly. I didn't have as much time as I had with Shutter. I didn't have a lot of time to ruminate and worry about what kind of decisions to make. I had to make those decisions quickly and immediately and get them on the page. So that was a little bit different for me. But usually I do an extensive amount of research As for Shutter, a lot of what was Shutter was based on is really my own childhood and my own experience working as a forensic photographer. And so I had a lot of personal experience to pull from. I had a lot of personal stories to tell. And I was able to use a lot of my own personal experiences and put them into the book. And so I think that process was a lot different. But I did a lot of research. In addition to working forensics for 16 years, I went to APD CSI class for 16 weeks. I did a lot of traveling to get some details together, that kind of thing. So I spent a lot of time researching Shutter, and it was hard to do. And I was a lot of story I had to pull from it. Now, Exposure was a little bit different. Of course, I didn't have a lot of time to write it. And I wrote Exposure on airplanes, in the airport, in vehicles, driving from one place to another, on my iPad, in between appointments at the doctor. I mean, seriously, I had to take any extra time I had working on all my other projects and work on the second book. And I actually did a significant amount of research on serial killers and a lot more research about just behavioral animal patterns, all kinds of crazy things that ended up like the relationship to the Catholic Church for different tribes here in New Mexico, research into the penitentes. I mean, I did extensive historical research, at least to pull in the second storyline about the serial killer. So that is really a big chunk of my writing process, is the research that goes into it, and all of the notes and the discussions about the different characters I'm going to bring in there and what their backgrounds are. And I have to do research on their backgrounds, and every single person has an extended amount of research. While I'm doing that research, the story continues to build in my brain. And I had a discussion with Marcy Rendon, another Indigenous author, a couple of weeks ago when she was in conversation with me. And I think that we shared that particular process of being moms and being so busy that you don't always have time to sit at your computer and write your stories. So a lot of your story development happens in here. So you're constantly thinking about your character. You're constantly thinking about how you're going to build the story up, so that when you sit in front of a computer and you finally have an hour or two to yourself, that story that's been stored up here for the last 2 or 3 days just kind of pours out of you, like it just is like waiting to get out on the page. And I think that's just how busy moms work. We have a million things going on at once. And once we have that moment of silence when we can just sit there and write, it just comes out. That story has already been formed. I already know what's going to happen. It's just a matter of getting it out on the page. And so I also, in addition to that, will curate a specific playlist for what I'm writing. And it's essential for me to have that because I'm always in like a kinetic, crazy environment at an airport or doing something else, sitting in a car, driving somewhere, even in my own house where I have my husband's running our business and my son is in and out going to college and doing his work and asking me when dinner is starting and where the laundry is and whatever else is going on. I have these headphones, noise canceling headphones, and they see me with those headphones on. They know my playlist is playing and mom is in her other world. She's Rita Todacheene at the moment, and we just kind of have to let her be. And that's, I mean, that music, I'll just listen to it and it just like puts me into this mode where I don't hear or see anything but what I'm writing, and I'm able to just concentrate on that. And that is my writing process. And it's like I say, it's insanity. And a lot of writers can't write that way. A lot of writers need silence. They need solitude. They need quiet. I'm just not that person. I don't have any time in my life where that any of those elements come into play. So yeah, I mean, that playlist and my process is really important to me.
Oh my God. Well, I have a lot of questions for you, Ramona, but questions are pouring in faster than I can get to them. So I want to get to everyone in the audience because my goal here is, I always say, I founded this series with the goal of connecting readers to their favorite writers and introducing them to their next favorite writers. So let's get them introduced to you. Okay. So Robin saying, thinking, wow, 10 years. No, that is perseverance. It also took me 10 years to write my book. So I am high-fiving you. And the fact that it only took you a year and a half to write your next book is giving me hope that maybe I can write a little bit faster too. Kim wants to know she says, these books are new to me. See, it's working, connecting you to your favorite writer or your next favorite writer. Are they standalones?
Well, yeah, I mean, you could easily read Exposure and not need that development story of Rita. I mean, it pretty much plops you into her world and what she's doing and her gift or curse, depending on how you look at it. And I mean, I think you can easily get into that story. But if you really want to dig deep into the details and get some background, also some cultural history and background into how the Dene people work and our belief systems about death and why we fear it and why it's an important thing to avoid in our lives, then you may want to read the first one, just to get some background on who Rita is and how she came to be who she becomes in Exposure. But you can easily read Exposure or Shudder on its own and still get a lot out of it.
Thank you for the great question, Kim, and thank you for the great answer, Ramona. And we have both books available tonight from our favorite woman-owned independent bookstore, that is Murder by the Book. So whether you're watching with us on Facebook or YouTube, you can order Exposure and the first book of the series, Shudder, which was longlisted for the National Book. And here is that link. So whether you're watching with us on Facebook or YouTube, you can get your mitts on one or both books right here. Okay, let's jump back into the questions. Okay, so you shared that your first book took you 10 years, your second book took you a year and a half. Renee wants to ask, do you like having a deadline? Does that work well for your writing?
Yes.
Okay.
My editor will be the first one to tell you that I am really good with making a deadline. So if you give me one, I will make it. And I think I need deadlines. If you don't give me a deadline, I will just continue to write on that ad nauseum, and I don't know when it'll get to you. But if you give me a deadline, I'm pretty good with that. And I need them. I feel like I need that structure for me.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, there's plenty of edits that can go on after that, but I need to at least make that initial deadline.
I love that. Robin saying, we're so glad you persevered too, Sarah. Thank you, because it's a decade of our lives, right, Ramona? That's a long time. I mean, I think about, I started my book in my 30s. Now I'm, in my 40s. It's, that's a whole 10 years. It's crazy.
It is.
Okay. Renee wants to know, Ramona, do you prefer writing novels or screenplays, and why? Yeah. So you're also a professor of film and media studies there in New Mexico. Tell us about that. What do you prefer?
I mean, I like writing screenplays. It's a completely different set of skills. I mean, really, the screenplays force you to tell a story with as little as possible. I mean, that's what the whole idea behind a screenplay is. And they tell you, if you don't wrap your story into the head of your funders within the first couple of pages, people just throw it on the no list, and then nobody reads your screenplay. And it's like, it's super competitive, and you have to be very direct, and it's hard to write a screenplay. It is. It's a certain talent. It's a certain skill set. Now, for me, I prefer fiction, and I didn't know that until I started writing fiction. I've been a filmmaker for 30 years now, and I can say that if you would have asked me 10 years ago if I would have written a novel, I would have said, no way, I would hate to do that. Why would I ever want to write a novel? Because I don't really like writing. It's not one of my favorite things to do. But now that I've written
Me
a
too,
novel,
Ramona. Thank you for saying it out loud. I was like, keep your face, be cool, be impassive. I was like, oh my God, me too.
no, I mean, it's like, it doesn't, I mean, just because you're a writer doesn't mean that you love writing. It just means that it's something you're good at, and you have a story to tell and you tell it. It doesn't mean you necessarily like doing it. And I can say I'm one of those people. Once I'm there and I'm sitting there and I'm writing, I like it. I'm there. It's a stream of consciousness, I guess. but it's getting me to that point, getting me to sit down and stop vacuuming and doing whatever else I'm trying to do to avoid writing, and sitting down and doing the work that I love it. And the cool thing about writing fiction as opposed to writing a screenplay is that when you're writing a screenplay, all you're thinking about, at least me, is my budget. Like, oh, I could never afford to do this scene in my budget, so I won't even. And it curbs your. I think it kind of curbs your creative potential sometimes, because you're too worried about being able to pay for that scene, or that's going to cost so much money in CGI if I wanted to do that, or how would we even work that in? So that's kind of what's going in my mind as a producer when I'm writing a screenplay. Now, when I'm writing fiction, the sky's the limit. I can write about anything. I can be on a different planet. I can be 50 years into the future. That is the coolest thing about writing novels as compared to writing screenplays. I don't have to worry about budgets. I don't have to worry about what actor we get to do this, or what kind of budget restrictions that we have. When you're writing novels, you don't have to worry about that. And so for me, it's been a freeing experience to move from writing screenplays and doing film work, and then transitioning into fiction and writing novels, because it's allowed me so much more freedom as a storyteller, and it's allowed me to do so many more things with stories that I would have never dreamed of writing it as a screenplay or doing a documentary about it, which is mostly what I do as a filmmaker, is make documentaries. And so
Oh,
it's a completely different kind of experience. Yeah.
I
But
love
in that same way, though, I take a lot of the skill set that you use to be a documentarian and use it in my writing practice. And I think it's really a good thing to be able to transition from that world into this one.
Renee is saying, thank you for that very detailed answer, Ramona. Yeah, me too. I hadn't thought about, like, oh my God, of course, when you're writing a screenplay, you have to think about, well, if I want that car to explode, that's going to cost me another, $50,000 or whatever the cost would be, like that. Whereas in the book, I'm going to send it on Mars. There's a spaceship. The spaceship explode. You could just the whole planet. You could do whatever. That's really a cool answer. A cool thing to consider. Now, Ramona, I want to talk about Rita's gifts, or as you so rightly pointed out, sometimes her curses. So, for those who have not yet read the book, her gift slash curse is she can hear the voices of the serial killer's victims. So this book is dual POV between the killer, the serial killer, and Rita, who is the only one who can hear the voices of his victims, and his victims are all indigenous. And the reason I want to bring this up is because a couple of years ago, I started listening to the Missing and Murdered podcast, which is about missing and murdered Indigenous women in Canada. And it was then that I started to really learn about the statistics that Indigenous women are between 3 and 3.5 times more likely to be victims of violent crime than other women. And the violence that they face is often a greater degree of horror. So we have a real problem with this topic, and I want to be sure that we are addressing that and honoring that as we talk about this book. So the first thing I want to start though with is, do you believe in ghosts? So Rita, very interesting, right? You're Ramona. She's Rita. Both starts with an R. Both ends with an A. Both Indigenous women. I'm wondering, both in forensics. I'm wondering, first of all, do you believe in ghosts, and do you see them? Do you hear them?
Well, that's the one thing I think that Rita and I don't share.
Okay.
I I have never. Well, when I was writing Shutter anyway, I had never had any kind of paranormal experience at all. Like, I had heard stories.
Okay.
I've heard, like, I've heard about it. I'm creeped out about it. I believe it, but I had never had proof that it existed. I mean, I kind of feel like there's a realm between when we pass and when we move on to our next iteration, that if we have unsettled business, or that there is something that needs to happen for us or for our family, that spirit that we carry within ourselves remains and stays. I believe that. I believe that there's some, and there are some people who are at peace and who are able to just move forward, and that they don't come back. They don't need to be ghosts because they don't have anything that's kind of left over for them to finish. So I think that there's a realm for that. I really do. Now, have I seen a ghost, or have I ever personally dealt with a ghost? Not until after I wrote Shutter. And I was actually teaching at the Institute of American Indian Arts. I was holding a film workshop for youth, and we were in that space editing, or the students were editing their films. So I was there with a couple of other filmmakers early in the morning before our students showed up, and we were setting up our computers and getting things, the hard drives ready and everything ready for the students to come in. And the three of us were in that room alone, and we had a big giant conference table that was also in the room. So we're sitting there talking, looking at some of the projects, and I heard something behind me, and I turned and I watched my coffee mug, which was sitting on the end of the conference table, skid all the way down the table by itself and kind of just perch there at the end of the table. And at first I thought I was crazy. And I was smacked the other filmmaker that was standing next to me. I was like, oh my God, Pisha, Pisha. And she was like, I'm watching it, girl. We watched it together. Because at first it was like, am I just seeing things? But she was right behind me, and we watched that cup move all by itself. And I was so freaked out. I went over there and I looked under the table. There was no way that thing just moved by itself, but we saw it. We saw it move. And after that, I had like two more things that happened on campus while I was there. One time I got scratched when I was filming there. I got scratched by something that pulled me behind one of the curtains in the black box theater. And I thought at first it was just me, like just being clumsy or whatever. But when I got out of there, I had actual like red raised scratch marks on my arm from where I had fallen into the curtain. And so I know that there are some definite spirits, or there's some kind of entity, or there's something there at that place that continues to stick around and talk to people who are there, or do things like that. And I have heard since other stories about people have told me about that place. So it's definitely got some kind of spirit energy there. But this was post Shutter. So I, up to that point, hadn't really had my own paranormal experience. I had just heard about other people's experiences, and I was pulling those into the story. But that was the first time after I wrote the book that I had my experience.
Do you think that those experiences, moving the coffee cup, seems like a hello? The scratches seems a little more aggressive, less friendly. Yeah. The coffee cup is a friendly hello. Have you thought about what you were working on or talking about when you said that? Whereas, I wonder if you've almost opened yourself up to, Rita is open and she receives messages, and through that, she's able to do good. She's able to use her gift for good in the world. Does it feel like they are approving of you? Like, hey, thanks for opening this conversation, Ramona? Or does it feel like, what did it feel like when
it didn't feel malicious?
Okay.
It didn't feel malicious to me, at least in that initial experience. I felt like it was a more mischievous presence because we had been having such a problem with the editing bays. Like the day before, we had been trying to export a couple of projects on that side of the room that were just kept resetting and kept like kicking us out of the project, and then like erasing everything we just did and stuff like that. Okay. And so I kind of feel like maybe it was more of a mischievous presence that was there. And I tell you, like after that happened, we were freaked out. We like saged out the room and smoked it, and like we really freaked out because we thought, oh my God, maybe that's why we've been having all these issues with the machinery, like ghost in the machine, right? Like something's going on. And then once we like kind of smoked the room out and like kind of made our intentions clear, like, I know you want us to see you and we saw you, but like just let these kids finish their projects and like just let us be. Like we're not going to do anything to you. Just let us be. And kind of just said it to the spirit and told it just leave us alone. It did. Yeah. It did. Like we
Okay.
never
All
had
right.
any other incidents or problems with the editing machines or anything. It was like,
Okay.
it kind of was like, oh, sorry, okay, like I'll let you guys do your work or whatever. But yeah, like we were really freaked out by it, and that helped. Like just addressing the situation and telling it, like, I know you wanted us to see you and we saw you, but now it's time to let us go because we've got these kids who are doing this thing and we need to help them. And it was cool with that. Um,
Wow.
and I knew a couple of alumni from that school who were known as being kind of cantankerous and mischievous in the world. And they had just passed away like right before that happened. And it kind of made me wonder, I wonder if it's them, you know,
Oh,
because like
yes.
it would be, that would be something they would do, no?
It sounds like it. Well,
Yeah.
last week I had Del Sandine on, and she wrote a book about a haunted house called This Cursed House. And there is a book that keeps falling off a shelf, which is something that happened to Dell when she was a kid. She was home alone, and this book flew off the shelf and fell on the floor. And she incorporated that into her book. And so we talked about how that was drawn from real life, and does she believe in ghosts and whatever. And so that night, I went out to dinner, and it was late because my interviews end at 9 p.m. By the time I got to dinner, it was 9:30. It was me and one other table, my husband and I at one table, and then across the room, another table. And there were all these empty tables in between us. And all of a sudden, something the flew off the table and landed with a big bang. And I turned and looked at the other table, which is 4 tables away, and they looked at me, and we just were like, "You saw," like, and we both just looked at the vase that had fallen on the floor. And it was like, okay, something is happening here. And it was so weird because it was literally right after I did that interview. So I think these things happen. Oh my gosh, all of the surprised faces and all the love. I see you guys on Facebook. Thank you. Yes. I see you. I see you. John, welcome to the conversation. Joining us from Northeast Ohio. So good to have you here. You guys, the book is out now. Exposure by Ramona Emerson, available via our favorite woman-owned independent bookstore, that is Murder by the Book. So it is spooky season, Halloween right around the corner. Get your mitts on this book. Here's the link, whether you're watching with us on Facebook or YouTube. I put it in the comments. Oh, Tracy Clark saying too close to Halloween for this ghost talk.
That's the perfect time. That's the perfect time.
That's why we are here. That's why we're here. But is that something that you wanted to address about the increased rates of violence that Indigenous women face, Ramona?
Absolutely. And I think really this particular book really concentrates on the community of Gallup, New Mexico, which is a border town, which is kind of what we call towns that are kind of based around tribal communities, places like Gallup, New Mexico, Albuquerque, New Mexico, where I lived, Farmington. So these are towns that are major cities or towns that are around tribal communities, and there are significant amounts of violence that happen within these communities. And so I really wanted to highlight the issues that we face there, and especially in a town like Gallup, New Mexico. That particular town has a huge history going back many years about racism, the alcohol epidemic, and the alcohol industry kind of ruling how that town is built and how that town runs on a daily basis. So this book really gets into the history of colonialism in Gallup and the effects of the influences of the Catholic Church into that community, also the influx of alcohol into that community as part of that colonial process, and how that has changed the communities and the populations that live around that town. And so it was by using a serial killer, I was able to take a lot of that history and a lot of the events that have happened historically in that town and hand it over to somebody like Brother Gabriel and Exposure, and let them discuss and highlight some of the issues that we face in that town and that Indigenous people face in border towns around our communities. And so, yeah, I think it starts to touch on the missing and murdered women epidemic, um, and it will continue to move into that space as we move into the third book. But I really concentrated the second book on Gallup as a community that is in need of change, that has a significant history surrounding colonialism and the treatment of Dene people within that town. And so I think it was a great opportunity to bring that out through Rita and through Brother Gabriel, and also just talk about colonialism and its impact on Native communities. So
Thank you for doing that, Ramona. Everyone here knows me. Most of y'all have been with me for the whole 4.5 years we've had this series, and I love a page turner. Obviously, I love mysteries and thrillers. That's what we're here for. But what really feeds my soul is when a mystery and thriller digs into a deeper, bigger issue. That is what really invigorates me, and I feel like, yes, I want to talk about these things, I want to think about these things, I want to read about these things. So thank you for doing that. And I think this is so meaningful and so important, and written in such a exciting, compelling, page turning way, but really getting into some important issues. So thank you for that. Robin wants to know, is this the same area as Deborah J. Ledford's books about the Pueblo community?
Well, I Deborah's book is about Taos Pueblo. So Taos Pueblo is, I'd say, maybe 3 hours from the community that I'm speaking about. But she, both her and I are tackling indigenous issues in New Mexico. And in New Mexico, we have a very heavy indigenous people presence. We have over 19 pueblos in the state of New Mexico, and also two tribes, major tribes, the Apache and the Navajo and the Dene, also take space in this state. And so we are a very heavy indigenous community, and Deborah's books really deal with a Pueblo. Taos Pueblo is known for being a very closed, secretive, traditional cultural belief systems, and they still adhere to their traditional belief systems and their traditional dances and their ceremonies. So Deborah's books are very intimate about those details, and I have to say that Deborah did a significant amount of research herself, and actually went the extra step as far as clearing what she was talking about with tribal members, talking to the Pueblo and making sure that what she was including in her book was okay, and going that extra step to be culturally responsible about what she was writing. And I think as indigenous people and writers, we carry that extra burden on us as how we are implementing these stories, and how we're talking about our people and talking about our belief systems. And it's very important to get it right, and to be and to do the right thing. And Deborah did a great job with her book as well. If you haven't read those, but Taos Pueblo and the Dene people are two very different cultural groups who have completely different belief systems, different traditions, different beliefs. So it's strange that we live in the same state and we're 3 hours apart, but we are two completely different sets of people and belief systems.
And Deborah, I had Deborah on when her book came out, and she shared about her incredible research process in going into that very secretive and protected enclave, and really, really doing the work to get the stories right, and how receptive and open they were and welcoming they were, and how she did, as you exactly said, take that extra step of then showing them her writing. Is this okay? Did I get it right? Can I do better? It's so wonderful. And so appreciated. And Nick Medina is another incredible indigenous writer who's really doing the work of getting it right and telling these stories. It's just such a pleasure to have him on as well. And all of these stories are just so meaningful and so important. Margaret Pinard joining us from Portland, Oregon, saying, hello, Ramona. Shutter was so thrilling. And she has a question for you. She wants to know, Do you have any opinion on the Dark Winds series in Netflix? Yeah, I'm watching it too, Margaret.
Yeah, I mean, uh, Hillerman has been a polarizing figure, I think, for a lot of Indigenous writers. And he was a writer in the 1980s. And I remember his books coming out when I was kind of a young person. And I remember my grandma telling me her commentary was always like, "Who is talking to him?" Um, because he was talking about stuff that we are not supposed to talk about, and putting some very detailed information into his books, where I think at that point, a lot of Navajo writers were on the fence about how what they thought about that, like letting an outsider tell our stories. So I think there was half of people who were like, why is this outsider telling stories about us? But then there was also this other half of people who were just happy to see themselves on a page, because nobody had written a story about Navajo people and about that.
Mm,
So I think in the 80s, that was kind of like the weighing that was kind of the weight that he carried. But moving into now 2024, I think a lot of people, myself included, are ready to move on from that and talk about why people telling our stories outside of community is a kind of can be egregious, can be misleading, can also not give justice to the Indigenous storytellers and their real belief systems. So when I watch things like when I see Hillerman books still kind of out there in the literary space, and I see that translated into a series like Dark Winds. And I've watched a couple of episodes of Dark Winds, and I can say that I'm I feel like the series is basically like how I feel about Tony Hillerman. It's an outsider's viewpoint of Dene culture, and he does not get it right most
mm,
of the time. And the people there are, it continues to be written by people who are not Dene. I think that first set season they tried to implement Dene writers into the series, but I think a lot of and a lot of Indigenous writers are reluctant kind of to be a part of that, transferring a non-Indigenous person's story into an Indigenous story for this series. I think a lot of people have issue with that. And so I think a lot of the writing that's going on now is outside of Indigenous culture, it's outside of Dene culture. The actors who are playing those roles are not Dene. They are Canadian. They are Lakota. They are outside of our language group. They are outside
mm.
of our community. And yeah, there are a few Dene B players or background or extras in the book or in the series. But for me, Dark Winds and Tony Hillerman will always be non-Indigenous stories, told by an outsider about a culture and a people that they don't really know anything about. And that even now, that kind of thing wouldn't fly.
Right.
Um, it did fly in the 80s and the 90s, and the historical ramifications of that continue to give lens to things like Dark Winds. But for other Dene people like myself, the other Dene filmmakers, storytellers, writers, I think they feel a certain amount of contempt for Dark Winds,
Right.
and the fact that they are not speaking Dene correctly. A lot of the things that they do in the series is not correct. And the cultural people who have been hired on that series that I've heard from or spoken to basically say that they come and they do give cultural viewpoints or tell them that's not correct, you should do it this way, you're not speaking the language correctly, this is how you say it, or kind of like pat it on the head and say, yeah, thank you, and they still continue to do it
Oof.
incorrectly. So I just stopped watching Dark Winds, because it's not correct. It's almost laughable in some areas. I mean, I can see why people are interested in it, and it's that same thing that continues to keep people reading his books as well, and to continue to have books like Tony Hillerman's books be 1, 2, and 3, and 4, and 5, and 6 on best-selling Indigenous fiction lists when they don't belong there. So I think that it's this new group of Indigenous people who are coming out and actually being able to write their own stories that are changing that narrative. And hopefully, people who make these lists about bestsellers and who can be an Indigenous writer or who is considered the people behind the helm of Native fiction will change. And that people outside of our communities telling stories should not be considered as Native American fiction.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And I think we see that in so many different places, right? People
Absolutely.
who did not have a voice, whatever marginalized community did not have a voice. And at first, you know, in the 80s, that everybody's so happy just to see that story, because thank God someone's finally telling it, even if it's not a Native person or a person who is that orientation or that gender or that culture or, you know, whatever. But then now we're at a point where we're finally opening slowly, too slowly, you know, saying, hey, maybe we should hear from the people, you know, themselves, let's hear from the people themselves about their culture. It would be like if we only let, you know, women, we never let women write stories about women. You know, if a male writer finally wrote a story about a woman, we'd be like, yay, a woman on the page. But hey, I have an idea. What about a woman writing a woman's story? You know,
Exactly.
It's like, no, let's get some Danae writers telling Danae stories. Let's get some women writers telling women's stories. Let's get, you know, let's give people, because of course only that person can tell their story with their eyes from within the culture, and that makes sense. And it really, I'm going to stop watching it now because I didn't know that, and now I know. So thank you, and I'm not going to use my Netflix points to push it to the top 10 most viewed. Yeah, exactly. Okay, Renee saying, I read both of Deborah Ledford's last 2 books. Amazing books. Robin saying, well, 19 Pueblo areas and even more through. I think I'm saying that wrong. Am I saying that wrong? Is it not Pueblo?
It's Pueblo.
Pueblo. Thank you. Pueblo areas and even more throughout New Mexico. I really appreciate the authors being culturally responsible. Thank you. Margaret saying, we love a thriller with social justice and political justice heft. Margaret, preach, girl. She's saying, oh, that's terrible about Hillerman. That I hope it got adapted to be more sensitive in the series. Not really.
But we can hope.
We can hope. Renee is saying, I think many people in different communities keep everything secret to the outside world. However, now it's important for people in those communities to write and tell about their cultures. She's saying in the past, you know, yes, exactly. And now it's important for those communities to write and tell about their own culture's history. Absolutely. Margaret saying it's an interesting conundrum for the writers and the actors who take part. This is so good to know. Me too, Margaret. Robin saying, seriously, how difficult would it be to do things in these movie and TV strips correctly? Let's hear from those people. Actually, let's hear from the people what Danae means. Exactly. Yeah. Renee saying, exactly. Thank you, Sarah. That's what I was trying to say. You did say it, Renee. I'm just reading your words. Yes, exactly. Why go back? We now have so many Indigenous authored books.
Right.
Let's have more of them. Let's hear it, as you said, Margaret, from the people. Y'all, we are over time. Time flies when you're having this much fun. I want to remind you that we don't just vote every 4 years, although please make sure you're registered to vote.
Yes.
We vote with every purchase that we make for the authors we want to see succeed, the bookstores that we want to see succeed, and the books that we want to see succeed. So let's support Indigenous authors. Let's support wonderful, cool, dual POV serial killer books. Who loves a serial killer? I mean, on the page, me. Only on the page. Only
on the page, yes. Not in person, thank you.
Thank you. And here is that link, whether you're watching with us on Facebook or YouTube. Get your mitts on Rita and both of Ramona's books, Exposure and Shutter. Thank you for being here, Robin says, with us today. Margaret saying, yay, congratulations, Exposure, best of luck. Renee already voted. Good. We need your vote in Florida. That is a wrap. Thank you all for joining us. And if you're a quiet watcher without a commenter, that's okay. I see you. Thank you for watching, Linda, Annette, and Angel, Debbie, Mark, Carrie, Joe, oh my goodness, Renee D, Joan, John, oh my goodness, Diane, Ed, oh sorry, Edie, Edye, Edie, thank you. Joe T, great to have you here. Thank you. Charles, Sue, Philip, Irene, Kim. Oh my goodness, everybody. Thank you so much. Jill. Oh my gosh, if I miss you, Melissa, good to have you. George, Nancy, thank you, thank you, thank you all. Go get a snack, go get a drink, and I'll be back at the top of the hour with Sydney Graves joining us live from Arizona. Stay tuned.